The phone buzzed on the polished oak of my desk. I was deep into a quarterly logistics report for Logiflow Solutions, my company, and grabbed it out of pure reflex. An anonymous message. No number, no contact photo, no chat history. Cypress Grill. Back booth. Go now if you want the truth. For a second, I dismissed it as spam, a wrong number. But something in the sterile, direct phrasing snagged my attention. The sharp punctuation, the lack of any preamble. It felt deliberate, almost surgical. The truth. The words echoed in the quiet of my home office, a space I'd built for focus and control. Now, that control was fracturing. I stared at the screen, but it offered no more clues. It didn't need to. A cold certainty settled in my gut. This was about Isabel. She'd told me she was spending the afternoon with her mother, a casual mention as she kissed my cheek that morning. It sounded normal, routine, no urgency, no excessive details that might betray a lie. I grabbed the keys to my Audi A8 from the hook by the door. On the drive down Pacific Coast Highway, my heart pounded with a foreign heavy rhythm, a drumbeat for a disaster my eyes hadn't yet witnessed. The salty Newport Beach air did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside me. Cypress Grill on the coast was only a few minutes away. It was a place we used to frequent years ago for anniversaries, for closing big deals, a monument to the life we'd built. To be heading there now, summoned by a cryptic text, felt like I was about to watch a twisted parody of our own history. I parked a block away, watching the restaurant's warm, inviting glow for a moment before stepping out of the car. From the outside, it was a picture of upscale coastal tranquility, but the truth was waiting inside. I slipped in quietly, avoiding the hostess's eye. I wasn't a guest. I was an auditor, here to verify a catastrophic system failure. I skirted the edge of the dining room, using the decorative columns for cover, my eyes scanning for the secluded back booths with a view of the ocean. And then, I saw them. Time didn't just slow down, it froze. Isabel was sitting in the back booth, a soft, genuine smile on her face, the kind she reserved for moments of pure comfort. She was laughing at something the man across from her had just said. He was a stranger to me, impeccably groomed, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, with a kind of smug confidence that comes from managing other people's fortunes. He wasn't part of our world, but seated across from my wife, he looked like he owned it. The intimacy between them was a physical presence in the room. The way he leaned in, the way she mirrored his posture, the light touch of her fingers on the stem of her wine glass as her eyes held his. It was a silent language I had been excluded from. Then it happened. She leaned across the table, a slow, deliberate movement, and kissed him. It wasn't a peck. It was a long, lingering press of lips that spoke of familiarity and shared secrets. I swallowed, the taste of bile rising in my throat. My stomach clenched into a tight, cold knot. My hand tightened on my phone, but my mind was perfectly clear. This wasn't a moment for emotion. It was a moment for data collection. I raised the phone, opened the camera, and took a single, clear photograph. One was enough. The image was the proof, the undeniable data point that explained everything. With the evidence secured, I slipped the phone back into my pocket. My eyes burned, but my movements were steady as I turned and walked away. I had no desire to cause a scene, no need to demand an explanation. A confrontation was pointless. This was about observation, analysis, and acceptance of a new reality. I exited through a side door and walked back towards my car, each step feeling heavier than the last. My chest was tight, a band of pressure constricting my lungs, but my vision was sharp. I had just been awakened. Standing by my car, I glanced back at the restaurant one last time. In that instant, I saw him. The man with Isabel looked directly toward the exit, a faint smirk on his face. He'd seen me. He then leaned over, whispering something in Isabel's ear. Her smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold panic. She turned her head slowly, her eyes frantically searching the spot where I had been standing. Her body went rigid, a jolt of guilt finally hitting her system. But she didn't get up. She stayed put, a perfect statue of composure, pretending to resume a dinner that was now utterly ruined. Watching from the shadows, I understood. Everything was over. The pain didn't arrive in a hot flash of rage. It was a cold void, a sudden vast emptiness, where 20 years of marriage used to be. The promises, the shared laughter, the photos lining our hallway, all of it had just been shoved off a cliff into that void. It didn't matter what she would say later. I had seen the kiss. And more importantly, I now understood that the man Tristan Vance knew exactly who I was. He had orchestrated this. The anonymous message, the public display, it was a calculated move. He wanted to be seen. He wanted me to see them. The motive was still unclear, but the intent was not. This was a hostile takeover. That night, I returned to an empty house. The table in the dining room was set for two, just as it always was. The soft light in the hallway was on, a silent welcome to the end of a normal day. But nothing was normal anymore. This day would never end. I walked past the photos on the wall, us in Italy, on our wedding day, with our families, and felt nothing. I sat in my armchair in the dark, the silence of the house pressing in on me. Something inside me had gone quiet. A part of me that had trusted, that had loved unconditionally, had just been permanently shut down. And the cruelest part, even after everything I had seen, after understanding the cold calculation behind it all, a foolish, human part of me still waited to hear her key in the lock. She didn't come home. And that, more than the kiss, more than the text, was the final confirmation. It said. I woke before the alarm, my body stiff as if I'd spent the night in a street fight. The bed beside me was a pristine expanse of white linen, untouched, just as it had been when I returned from the restaurant. For a fleeting moment, the impulse to send a message flickered a demand for an explanation, a simple statement that I knew. But the memory of the scene, that crystal-clear image stored on my phone, was a firewall against any emotional outreach. It was data, and it was absolute. I went to the kitchen, the marble countertops cold under my fingertips. I brewed coffee, the familiar process, a small anchor in a world that had come unmoored. As I sat at the island, staring out at the perfectly manicured lawn of our Newport Beach home, I held on to a sliver of hope that this was a catastrophic error, a glitch in the system that could still be patched. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Isabel. It was cold, direct, and devoid of any emotion. She informed me that she wanted a divorce, and that, from this point forward, all communication was to be handled exclusively through our respective lawyers. Her legal counsel would be in touch. No apology, no justification. Just a corporate directive, as if I were a redundant employee being let go, an inconvenient variable in her new life equation. The message had the chilling efficiency of something that had been drafted and redrafted for weeks, waiting for the right moment to be deployed. The entire history of our life together, the laughter, the struggles, the triumphs, was suddenly condensed into a single, sterile text on a glowing screen. A tombstone. I read it once, then twice. The decision had been made. The door to any conversation slammed shut and bolted from her side. It wasn't a breakup. It was an expulsion. I took a deep breath, archived the message, and did not reply. The grief was a private process. The response had to be a public one, executed with the same impersonal precision she had just demonstrated. I spent the day in a state of focused calm. My first call was to a friend, a venture capitalist who had navigated a messy divorce of his own. He gave me a name, Jessica Chen. She's the shark, he'd said, but she's the shark you want on your side. I met Jessica that afternoon in her sleek high-rise office overlooking the harbor. She was sharp, composed, and wasted no time on pleasantries. I laid out the situation logically, chronologically. I uploaded a secure encrypted file to her server containing everything: the timestamped screenshot of Isabel's message, the high-resolution photo from the Cypress Grill, and read-only access to our joint financial statements. Jessica listened without interruption, her expression unreadable as she absorbed the data. When I was finished, she simply nodded. "The action plan is clear," she said, her voice firm. "Miss Hayes has dictated the terms of engagement. She wishes for all communication to be formal and indirect. We will honor her request completely." That was all I needed to hear. The moment I returned home, I began the process of systematically decoupling our lives. This wasn't driven by anger, but by a cold, clear logic. It was risk management. I logged into my American Express account and canceled her supplementary platinum card. I called the concierge at our building and revoked her access to the shared accounts. Her Equinox gym membership, paid for by my corporate account, was suspended. The subscriptions to Netflix, Hulu, and a dozen other services were terminated. One by one, I revoked her user privileges, with the clinical precision of a systems administrator shutting down a compromised network. Each action Isabel had taken had a consequence, and I was simply ensuring the system operated as designed. Jessica had advised me to document every step. Each cancellation was logged with the date and time, ready to be communicated to whatever legal representation Isabel procured. 2 days later, the first formal contact arrived. An email from a man named Marcus Thorne. His tone was a masterful blend of feigned charisma and overt aggression. The email demanded immediate emergency financial support, claiming Isabel had been unilaterally and maliciously cut off from basic resources. It painted a picture of a desperate woman left destitute, urgently requiring compensation until the formal legal process could be established. I forwarded the email to Jessica without comment. Her response, sent to Marcus Thorne less than an hour later, was a masterclass in professional takedowns. It was a simple, one-page letter. Attached was a single PDF, a clean, time-stamped screenshot of Isabel's own message, the one demanding that all communications cease and be handled by lawyers. Jessica's letter dryly pointed out that I had merely been complying with my wife's explicit written instructions. There was no surprise cutoff. There was only a logical follow-through on a directive initiated by his client. The impact, however, spread beyond law offices. The carefully curated social ecosystem of Newport Beach began to stir. Mutual friends, neighbors, even distant family members started to reach out. Concerned texts, short phone calls, invitations for a quick coffee to talk. The message was always the same, wrapped in varying degrees of gentle condescension. I was being too harsh. I was taking things to an extreme. "Think about everything you've lived through together," one friend pleaded. Another appealed to Isabel's public image, painting her as a fragile woman who had simply lost her way. None of them had seen the photo. None of them had read the text. None of them understood the chilling precision of the betrayal. Done. I didn't justify myself. I didn't explain. I simply maintained my position. Silence became my shield, the only way to preserve what little dignity I had left in this narrative. Jessica reinforced the strategy. "This is a classic tactic, Ethan," she told me over the phone. "They're trying to create a public narrative of you as the villain to pressure you into making emotional concessions. Do not give in. The line between firmness and fragility is very thin when you're dealing with this level of manipulation. And it was already clear that any opening I provided, any crack in my resolve, would be weaponized against me. Lud the very insect. The line separating firmness from fragility is very thin when dealing with emotional manipulation. Jessica Chen had made that clear, and it was now my operating principle. Any concession, any crack in the firewall would be exploited. The most telling move, however, came a week later. I received an automated alert from a dormant joint account we held at a small Orange County credit union an account we hadn't touched in years, containing a non-trivial amount of emergency funds. An access attempt had been made from Isabel's laptop. It had been denied, as I had placed a security freeze on it days prior. It was a clumsy, desperate move, but it was invaluable. The attempt was logged, time-stamped, and immediately forwarded to Jessica. Every attempt by Isabel to circumvent the formal process was another piece of data, another brick in the wall of our defense. It was then that I began to fully understand. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was a fundamental divergence of principles. While I was methodically dismantling the infrastructure of a shared life, Isabel was frantically trying to loot the warehouse before the locks were changed. What she never anticipated was resistance built on logic, not emotion. What our friends and family didn't expect was that the man they saw as the quiet, accommodating husband would have such clarity while the foundations of his life were crumbling. The man in shock had been replaced by a CEO managing a hostile dissolution. The pain was a constant low-frequency hum beneath the surface, but overriding it was a strategic decision to reclaim my self-respect. And at that point, that was worth more than any marriage. The legal process began in earnest weeks later. I, a man who built his entire career on direct communication and transparent data, found myself immersed in a world of petitions, discovery filings, and formal hearings. Jessica handled every detail with the precision of a surgeon. She knew which evidence to present and when, which motions to file, and which of Marcus Thorne's arguments to dismantle with cold, hard facts. Each document submitted to the court was part of a meticulously constructed timeline. Nothing was left to interpretation. Isabel's text message demanding an end to direct communication became the cornerstone of our defense. It established the protocol that she herself had mandated. Alongside it, Jessica presented the bank statements showing the sequence of cancellations, the report of the failed attempt to access the joint account, and, of course, the photograph from the Cypress Grill. The image of the kiss was not used as a weapon of moral outrage, but as contextual evidence. It served to demonstrate to the judge that my actions were not impulsive, but were a direct and reasonable response to a clear and undeniable breach of trust. On the other side of the aisle, Marcus Thorne attempted to construct an elaborate narrative of victimhood. He presented a portfolio of overdue bills from Neiman Marcus, threatening letters from her exclusive Pilates studio, and statements showing declined charges at high-end restaurants. He painted a picture of a devoted wife abandoned financially, her lifestyle and security stripped away without warning, but the narrative crumbled under the weight of its own data. The judge, a pragmatic man who clearly valued linear logic, paid close attention as Jessica laid out the timeline. The order for separation and the severing of communication came from Isabel. The argument that she was blindsided by the financial consequences was nullified by the dates and timestamps. Each cancellation I made occurred after her written directive. What Thorne presented as injustice was revealed to be a logical and direct consequence of his own client's actions. It was at this moment, when their legal strategy began to falter, that the attacks went asymmetrical. My company, Low-G-Flow Solutions, was the culmination of my life's work. I had founded it years before I even met Isabel, building it from a garage startup into a leader in supply chain optimization software. It was a premarital asset, legally shielded and entirely my own. My team was loyal, brilliant, and respected me as a leader. And it was this empire, my empire, that became their new target. Anonymous complaints began to filter through the official HR portal. Vague, unsubstantiated claims of workplace harassment, manipulation of client contracts, even hints of resource diversion. They were weak accusations, easily disproven. But in the world of corporate governance, even the whisper of impropriety can be damaging. My COO warned me immediately. Instead of reacting with anger, I switched to crisis management mode. I brought everything to Jessica, who, having anticipated this move, was already prepared. We worked with my internal counsel to organize a swift and thorough response. We collected internal reports, gathered sworn affidavits from long-term employees who had witnessed my conduct for over a decade, cross-referenced schedules, and provided irrefutable evidence that debunked every single point. None of the accusations survived the initial verification phase. The attempts to tarnish my reputation within my own company failed, but the collateral damage was real. 2 major contracts were put on temporary hold pending the outcome of the internal review. High-level board meetings were being called without my initial knowledge. Even with complete and total exoneration, a shadow of caution lingered in the air. Trust, once scratched, takes time to heal. But the deepest pain wasn't the financial risk or the professional hassle. It was the origin of the attack. I knew, with absolute certainty, that this wasn't an external threat. This was an inside job. Someone with intimate knowledge of corporate vulnerabilities. Someone with a powerful motive. Someone who wanted to see me fall. Isabel, despite her official distance, was orchestrating this from the sidelines, attempting to undermine the one thing I had built long before she became a part of my life. The hardest blow was the realization that behind all the years of supportive smiles, the elegant dinners celebrating my successes, and the whispered words of encouragement, a silent, vested interest had been watching, waiting, sizing up the assets for a potential acquisition. She hadn't just been my wife. She'd been a silent stakeholder waiting for a hostile takeover. During one of the subsequent hearings, Isabel performed for the judge. She wept, her voice trembling as she claimed, I treated her with cold indifference, that my actions had stripped her of her dignity as a woman and a wife. God damn. As Isabel's calculated sobs filled the courtroom, Jessica Chen rose slowly, her movements calm and deliberate. She gave Isabel a moment, allowing the performance to reach its peak before she addressed the judge. Your Honor, she began, her voice cutting through the manufactured emotion with quiet authority. Permission to present 2 pieces of evidence relevant to Miss Hayes' claims of coldness and a stripping of dignity. The judge nodded. Jessica projected the image of Isabel's text message onto the courtroom screens. The words were stark and clear, magnified for all to see. I want a divorce. From this point forward, all communication is to be handled exclusively through our respective lawyers. Jessica read the message aloud, word for word, her tone perfectly neutral. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Hayes, was accused of treating his wife coldly. The evidence shows he was, in fact, complying with a direct written order from Miss Hayes herself. She then presented the logs of the failed access attempt on the frozen joint account. This, she continued, is an attempt by Miss Hayes to deceptively move assets while simultaneously claiming to be a victim of financial abandonment. The judge stared at the evidence, then looked at Isabel, whose tears had abruptly stopped. He slowly removed his glasses, polished them with a cloth, and set them down on his bench. The silence in the room was heavy. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm, devoid of any sympathy. Miss Hayes, emotional manipulation will not be tolerated in this courtroom. The narrative being presented by your counsel is inconsistent with the documented facts. Your current financial instability appears to be a direct and foreseeable consequence of your own decisions, both legal and, frankly, moral. That was the moment the tide turned definitively. The attempt to flip the script, to paint me as the villain and her as the victim, had failed spectacularly. What remained was the simple, unvarnished truth that had been there all along. A man betrayed, systematically attacked outside the courts, who was now calmly protecting what he had spent a lifetime building. After that hearing, the atmosphere changed. The anonymous attacks on Logiflow Solutions ceased. Marcus Thorne's legal correspondence became less aggressive, more procedural. The pressure campaign from our social circle evaporated. But inside me, something had been permanently altered. The confident, open entrepreneur who once trusted implicitly was gone. In his place was a man who now measured every word, who reviewed personal agreements with the same meticulous scrutiny he applied to a multi-million-dollar software contract. Trust, once shattered, had reformed as armor. Throughout the mess, I maintained my composure. I never retaliated, never leaked a single detail to the press, never engaged in the mudslinging. It wasn't a matter of pride. It was a matter of strategy. Responding with poison would only prolong the toxic cycle Isabel had initiated. I knew who I was. I knew what I had built. Fortunes can be rebuilt, but peace of mind, once sacrificed to vengeance, is lost forever. The divorce trial concluded on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. After months of depositions, silent confrontations in sterile hallways, and mountains of financial reports, the verdict was read in a neutral, direct tone. I listened to each word, my eyes fixed on the judge, my expression unreadable. I felt no thrill of victory, no surge of vindication. What mattered was the legal affirmation of a quiet truth, that I had acted with dignity from beginning to end, even when faced with deception and malice. The decision was clear and devastating for Isabel. First, the judge affirmed that Logiflow Solutions was a premarital asset founded and built by me years before our marriage. As per California law and our prenuptial agreement, she had zero claim to any ownership stake. It was entirely shielded. Second, all jointly owned assets were to be divided based on documented financial contribution. Since my income had funded nearly every purchase, from our home to our art collection, the split was overwhelmingly in my favor. But the judge went further. Jessica's forensic accounting team had uncovered a property Isabel had discreetly purchased 2 years prior, a luxury condo in Laguna Beach, bought with funds from a joint investment account, but titled solely in her name and never declared. The judge ruled this a clear act of bad faith, an attempt to hide marital assets. As a corrective measure, he suspended any substantial alimony for a period of 5 years. The amount she was granted was purely symbolic, enough to cover basic needs but a catastrophic fall from the lifestyle she had known. It was at that moment that the flawless porcelain mask of Isabel Hayes finally shattered. Her perfect posture collapsed. A flicker of raw panic crossed her face before being replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. She left the hearing, avoiding all eye contact, refusing to comment, and for the first time since the process began, she walked out of the courtroom completely alone. Marcus Thorne was already packing his briefcase, his high-priced services concluded. In the days that followed, the story began to piece itself together through the quiet channels of Newport society. A mutual acquaintance, a man named David Foster, whom I respected but didn't know well, asked to meet for coffee at a quiet spot in Corona del March. My curiosity outweighed my desire for isolation, so I accepted. After some initial pleasantries, David got straight to the point. "Ethan," he said, stirring his espresso, "you need to know the whole story." The man Isabel was with, Tristan Vance. He's a wealth manager, a particularly slick one. He moves in circles where women have access to money but are bored and feel unappreciated. He makes them his project. I listened, my expression unchanged. "According to a friend who knows him well," David continued, "Tristan was the one who sent you the anonymous text message that night. It wasn't compassion. It was a calculated move in a hostile takeover. He wanted me to see them. He wanted to engineer the breakup. He believed, in his arrogant delusion, that by removing me from the equation, he would step into my life. He would become the new partner of the wealthy tech mogul's wife, gaining access to the money, the prestige, the entire turnkey lifestyle he coveted. But Tristan," David said with a wry smile, "made a catastrophic miscalculation. He's a wealth manager who failed to do his due diligence. He assumed Isabel was a partner in your wealth, an owner. He didn't know she was merely a beneficiary. He didn't know your company was a fortress, legally protected. He didn't know she would make mistakes in the divorce that would leave her with next to nothing. When Tristan Vance learned the details of the final ruling, he vanished. The whirlwind romance ended the day the money dried up. He stopped returning her calls, deleted their messages, and blocked her on all social media. He was a parasite, and the host was no longer viable. Isabel, stripped of her guaranteed assets, abandoned by her partner, and with her reputation in tatters, was left to face a harsh new reality. The American Express Centurion card was declined. The invitation stopped coming. Her name, which once opened doors all over Orange County, now closed them. I learned all of this gradually, in fragments, and none of it brought me any joy. I didn't rejoice in her downfall, or feel pleasure in watching Tristan's scheme implode. Because deep down, what I had lost was far greater than anything revenge could ever compensate for. The truth hurts when it arrives, but the silence it leaves behind can hurt even more. For nights, I would sit in my quiet home and think about how easily it could have been different if she had just chosen to be honest. If she'd had the courage to say the love was gone, to end things with respect, but she chose the shortcut, the hidden kiss, the whispered plan with a man who only saw her as an acquisition opportunity. Everything Isabel tried to manipulate turned against her. Everything Tristan tried to conquer collapsed in on itself. And what remained for me was the raw, cold realization that when you build your life on a foundation of lies and ambition, the ground will always, eventually, give way. I didn't emerge unscathed, but I emerged whole. I lost a marriage, but I kept my integrity. I lost trust, but I kept my company. I lost a part of my past, but I reclaimed my future. My conscience was clear. I had faced the worst side of someone I once loved, and I had chosen truth, justice, and silence as my answers. Without money, without a partner, and without her carefully constructed prestige, Isabel sank under the weight of her choices. Tristan disappeared, likely already scouting his next target in the Hamptons. And I, finally free, began again, in peace, my dignity intact, my fortune preserved, and my heart at last at rest. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next. See you next time.